Hello and welcome to the recorded study guide for Unit 1. I'm going to talk a little bit about how these recorded study guides work. What you will be seeing is our screens a lot like this with pictures and terms on them. The pictures I can move, I can manipulate them, I can draw on them, I can also write anywhere on this and you will see what I'm talking about. I can, for example, tell you that the first Americans, stuff that you need to know about them, can be found on page 5. It's chapter 1, section 1. And you would put that on your study guide right here under First Americans. So you would put page numbers and all the important stuff that I talk about each one of these terms on your study guide. You can find a link to this video at the website up here on the top of your study guide, and then you will also be able to get to this website by going to this QR code, which is right here circled in red. So let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, the first Americans can be found on page 5. What you're going to be focusing on here is, if you were in my class, we watched this short little YouTube video that described how these first Americans got over here. As the Ice Age goes on, the sea levels drop and it exposes the seabed, which is just land, and this area in between Siberia and the United States, or Alaska, right around here, was filled in and had land. So what these people were doing, they're people from Asia, this is Asia over here, and they would walk and follow animals through the land bridge, and as the Ice Age ended, that water rose, and that's why there's no land there today. So that is what we're looking at for first Americans. So what you would write down is that it's on page 5, that they crossed the land bridge between Siberia and Alaska, and all that kind of stuff. So moving on to these societies right here, each of them are on page 6. They're on they're all bullet pointed for you in a page, and it has all the definitions. This map is also in your book. So if we look at this real quick, it gives you a description of what each of the societies are. So sedentary, they stay in one place. Semi-sedentary, stay in one place, but they move every few years. And the non-sedentary are always moving, and that is because they are looking for food. But this gives you an outline of, what are some bullet points about them, who would be in the non-sedentary category, all that kind of good stuff. So I would look on page 6 for that. Moving on to the African kingdoms. Basically, this map is showing the 3 major zones of the African continent. You have the Sahara Desert, you have the savanna down here in the south, and then you have the rainforests and rivers in the middle. Because of these 3 different groups of climates, 3 different types of societies emerge, and because of this, they're not as large as the ones that we see in the North American continent. And these smaller groups often fight with each other. And because they are often fighting with each other, this is on page 15, by the way, they take a lot of prisoners. And the reason that they prefer to take a lot of prisoners is because when you think of like warfare, you're thinking that people are just killing each other. But in this case, these African tribes are capturing each other, and they are going to be using each other as their own slaves. And that's an important thing, because once we get later on into history, we see that setting up the slave trade when the Europeans come over. So the African kingdoms, 3 distinct zones, smaller tribes, and they set up where they use their enemies as slaves, basically. So if we move from Africa over to Europe, this is in chapter 1, section 3. It's when we're talking about the Black Death, the Great Famine, and the 100 Years' War, we're going to be looking at pages 17 through 18. Basically, these three events lead to, the Dark Ages in Europe. And when you think of the Dark Ages, basically think of no education, no learning. I use the example in my class of if you come to school and you have a test on Friday, and you're thinking, oh, I'll study for this test, I'll get smarter, I'll grow my education. But as you are going through your week, 50 people are dying around you in your class. Are you going to be more worried about that test, or are you going to be more worried about you not catching whatever's making everybody sick and not dying? You want to focus more on surviving and not just passing your test. So you're not going to grow, you're not going to learn, you're not going to focus on your education. And because of these things up here, Black Death, the Great Famine, 100 Years' War, it leads people to not focus on education and focus on survival, and things just get pretty bad. This is how the Bubonic Plague, or the Black Death, it's a disease that spreads throughout Europe, but basically rats carried it. A flea would bite the rat, and then the flea would bite this sad-looking dude right here, and then this sad little dude would lay down in bed and die. And then that's kind of the cycle, and you just have poor hygiene and poor sanitation because no one's really smart and learning things, and it's just all kinds of stuff. But these two things down here, the next things on your study guide, the Renaissance and the Reformation, basically bring Europe out of the Dark Ages. The Renaissance focused on art, education, learning, science, math, all this kind of stuff. The Renaissance, you're going to be looking at page 18 for that stuff that you need to know about that. But basically, the Renaissance makes people think, oh, maybe we should start reading and writing and learning new things and not just, getting bit by fleas and throwing our feces out in the streets. Maybe we should clean up after ourselves and get smarter. So that's one part of the equation of changing Europe's culture. The other part is the Reformation. The Reformation has to do with the church, and this is both on pages 18, and then it goes on to 19 as well. But there are two groups in the Reformation. You have those that follow the Pope, which are the Catholics, and then you have the Protestants. And if you look at these two groups, the Catholics want to follow the Pope, and then the Protestants want to break away in protest. And if you look at the word protest, that you can see protest right here in the word Protestant. So Protestants want to break away in protest, Catholics want to follow the Pope. They are reforming the church, which means to improve or change it. And if you look at reform, you can see reform right here in the word Reformation. So that's what you need to know about the Renaissance and the Reformation. You have the Renaissance changing European culture by adding art, education, learning, and math. And you have the Reformation changing European culture by forming a break in the church. And you get two distinct groups, Catholics who follow the Pope and Protestants who want to break away. The reason that these two movements are able to grow as much as they do is all due to the printing press, which can be found on page 19. This is a picture of the printing press. Basically, the printing press allows things to be printed quickly. Instead of, like, a Bible would have to be handwritten before the printing press. And if something's being handwritten, it's taking a long time. And the longer something takes to make, the more expensive it is going to be. So, because if it takes a long time, there's going to be less of them, which means more money. But with the printing press, it's shorter amount of time. You can make more, and then it becomes cheaper. I use the example, I mean, it's the only thing I can think of. If you think about purses, like, you carry things in your purse if you're a girl. And at Walmart, they'll sell purses. And you can buy a purse for like $10 or $20 or, it's going to serve the same purpose as any other purse. You're going to carry your stuff around in it. But if you go to the mall, you can go to a Coach store. Coach makes really expensive purses. And you can buy a Coach purse for $700. Now, the only difference between those two purses is that one is made with more skilled labor and it takes a long time. The Coach purse is like handmade and it's like one of a kind and there's not that many of them. So it takes a long time to make. A Coach purse takes a long time. There's less of them out there, so it's more money. That Walmart purse doesn't cost as much because it takes a shorter amount of time, you can make more of them, and you can sell them for cheaper. It's the same principle with books. If a Bible takes a really long time to make, you're going to make less of them, and you're going to charge more money. If it takes a shorter amount of time, you're going to be able to make more, and then it's going to be cheaper. So what the printing press allows to happen is the ideas of the Renaissance and the Reformation to spread, and then what it also does is allows more people to read. And because more people can read, they get curious about the world around them and what's going on out there and all that kind of stuff. And that leads us to the next portion of your study guide, which starts out with Christopher Columbus, which we're going to start looking at in chapter 2, section 1. And this is going to kick off the section of the study guide over exploration. So Christopher Columbus, you're going to look for him on page 28. This is Christopher Columbus right here. Make this picture a little bigger so you can see him. Basically, what is happening is people have decided that they want to get to Asia to trade with them. They want to get from over here in Europe to over there in Asia. So what they're trying to do is, instead of going through the land and all over this place to get over here, which takes a long time and you can't carry as much stuff, what they want to do is they want to go around Africa, go this way, and get up here. They do that, and they get to the Cape of Good Hope and all this good stuff that happens, and Henry the Navigator's planning all this stuff, and great, all this kind of stuff. But what Columbus wants to do is go a different direction. What he wants to do is he wants to sail west through the Atlantic Ocean, because this is how he sees the world. Right here. He thinks that he is going to be able to leave Europe, Spain, sail across, and then land right in Japan. Easy enough. What's the only problem with that? Well, the only problem is that what actually happens is he leaves Europe and you get right into the North and South American continents. So he's thinking he's going to be landing over here when actually he is landing here. He is an Italian sailor who is going to be sailing west in hopes to find Asia, an all-water route to Asia once again. He is going to be the first person that sails west, but when we looked at these maps, he underestimates the size of the world. He doesn't account for the North and South American continents being there. So he believes when he lands in the Caribbean islands that he is actually in he believes that he is actually in Japan, but in reality he is over here. These are some of his voyages. This is a picture that is in your book. Or something similar to this is in your book anyway, but you can take a look at that if you'd like. Moving on to the Treaty of Tordesillas. This is going to be found on page 30. Basically, what you need to remember about the Treaty of Tordesillas is in 1493 the Pope drew this dotted line right here called the line of demarcation. So this line right here he draws. Basically it said that on this side Spain has everything and on this side Portugal has everything. Okay? But if you look at this, they're going to start realizing that all of this land's over here and Portugal is going to be a little upset that they don't get any access to this land. So in 1494, the two countries meet and they move the line 800 miles west. And that's where you get this solid line right here. And that allows Portugal to get a little hold on the eastern part of South America, and it's going to allow them to set up some of their other things. But what you need to remember is that, you know, it moved the line and that now Spain controls or says that they have a claim to all of this land over here. All right. Moving on to another explorer, Amerigo Vespucci. He is on page 31. This is Amerigo with his awesome hat. If we look at this map again of Columbus's voyages, we will see that Columbus is credited a lot of times with discovering America, and he does discover this area of land, but if you will notice, he never actually lands on the mainland of America. He, on his fourth voyage, which is actually after Amerigo's voyage, he does land in Central America, but on his first one, he actually is only in these islands in the Caribbean. And he is still claiming, Columbus that is, that it's Asia. Amerigo lands on the continent, and he realizes that it is not Asia. And because of that, he writes this all down, and a German map maker names the North and South American continents after Amerigo Vespucci. So that's where those names come from. So after all this kind of exploration starts and people start coming over and all this kind of stuff, the Spanish start trying to set up their colonies. And the problem with the Spanish setting up their colonies is that there are already people living here, like, or already living in the North and South American continents, like the Aztecs. And then we'll get to the Incas after this. But the Aztecs are in Mexico. So remember that. The Aztecs are in Mexico. And the person that is going to be overthrowing them or leading the conquest of them is Hernando Cortez, and he is on page 31 and 32, and this is also, the fall of the Aztecs is on 31 through 32 as well. But, you know, you need to know that, you know, he comes into Mexico with 508 conquistadors. He's overthrowing the Aztecs. We're going to talk this with the Incas as well, but, you know, they think that these people are, you know, the Aztecs do, they think that these people are gods. I mean, they've never seen anything that looks like the armor that they're wearing or the horses that they're riding or the ships that they're sailing in or any of this. So they don't know what to think. They think they're gods, and that's something that they realize that is not true. Well, I mean, they think that it's true, and then the Spanish just start killing everybody. But basically, with the story of how Hernando Cortez overthrows the Aztecs, is the Spanish make alliances with all of the littler tribes that the Aztecs are ruling over. So the Spanish would say, hey, you hate the Aztecs, we don't want the Aztecs to be around anymore, how about you join up with us and we'll take them out together. So they, along with their Native American allies, march into Tenochtitlan. They capture Montezuma. After a long fight and some losses on the Spanish side, the Spanish are eventually successful, and the Aztecs no longer exist and rule over the Mexico and modern-day Mexico. Moving on to the Incas, what you'll need to know about the Incas is on page 32 as well. along with the guy that is going to be overthrowing them or leading the conquest of them, Francisco Pizarro. Now, just to illustrate the point, why they thought maybe that they could be gods. I mean, look at this guy's outfit. I mean, look at this hat, all this stuff that he's got on. I mean, it would be not a stretch to think, oh, I've never seen anything like this before. You know, he might be somebody that's got a lot of power or from another planet or who knows what. But the Incas are in Peru, and I talk about in my class how you can remember that they're from Peru. Is Inca has 4 letters, Peru has 4 letters, and if you need to remember how or who led the conquest, if you can remember that Inca has 4 letters, Peru has 4 letters, and they go together, Peru starts with a P, and Pizarro starts with a P. So when you think Peru, you think Inca, and when you think Peru, you think P and Pizarro as well. So Francisco Pizarro follows kind of the same path that Cortez does. The emperor of the Incas brings him gifts, and in hopes that they'll just kind of go away. Like, here's some gold, please go away. But they just go, oh, you have gold, we want to kill you now even more. And it kind of backfires on them. So what you really need to focus in on is how the Spanish were able to conquer these people so well. And I would look at page 33, and there's 3 bullet points that list out what we're talking about. And you know, you got to look at the alliances. You got to look at the spread of diseases, because they never had any immune system to them. The Native Americans didn't, like we've been talking about in class. And then also the brutal nature of how the Spanish treated the Native Americans. So, basically, that's what you need to know about the fall of the Aztecs and the Incas. Definitely try to remember these guys' names. Hernando Cortez goes with the Aztecs. Francisco Pizarro goes with the Incas. So now that the Spanish are over there making a lot of money, because with conquering these empires, they are also getting all of the Aztecs and the Incas' wealth, their gold, and all of their resources and everything, other countries start to think, hey, maybe we want to go over there and get some money, basically. So countries like England and France, and this is going to start us off with chapter 2, section 2 on page 35. So other countries are going to be looking for ways to get rich, and one of the ways that they're thinking about doing that is finding a quicker route to Asia. Now, they think that, you know, if they sail west, maybe they can just go over the North American continent, start going, and then they're going to be over here, and they're going to get to Asia, which would be back over here. But what they don't realize is that they're going to run into a little bit of a problem with that, because if you look on this map, if you try to go over this part, you're just going to get into Canada. Stupid Canada. Always ruining everything. But basically, what they're looking for is called the Northwest Passage, this all-water route to Asia. But it doesn't exist. It's not there. But it's an imaginary all-water route to Asia. But it doesn't stop them from trying, because they don't realize that Canada's there, because they don't have this nice little satellite image that we do today. So one of the first people that is out looking for this is John Cabot. He can be found on page 36. And by the way, some of the names are going to be switched around a little bit, how I talk about them, and on your study guide, so you might have to stick with me here and follow along. Make sure you're finding them on your study guide. But John Cabot, he is Italian, but he is sailing for England. So England is basically paying him money to sail for them. So he goes west, and he's looking for a northwest passage and an all-water route to Asia. So he goes over here, and he lands in Newfoundland. So you need to know that he sailed for England, he was Italian, and he landed in Newfoundland, Newfoundland. So that's what you need to know about John Cabot. Moving on to Giovanni De Verano. He is also looking for a northwest passage. He is also going to be on page 36. He is also Italian, but he is going to be sailing for France. So France is giving him money to sail for them. He's also looking for the northwest passage. Obviously couldn't find it because it doesn't exist. Jock Carter is going to be sailing in what will later become the St. Lawrence River. This is in Canada a little bit. This is like Maine, and then we get down in here to the Great Lakes down in here. But he sails down through this would be the Atlantic Ocean over here. So he goes through this and then comes in here and goes down, and then he eventually sets up or he lands in what would become Montreal down here. So Jack Carter is also on page 36, and I would focus in on him landing in what would become Montreal. So yeah, Jack Carter. All right. So all those people are looking for the Northwest Passage, and a lot of them are from England, some of them from France. But if we look at the area that they are exploring in up here on this map, they're all in this area over here. We're exploring around here. And the problem with that is, if we remember back to the Treaty of Tordesillas, you have this line. So Spain is thinking, hey, this is all of ours over here. This is all our stuff, and you're over here trying to take our land. So they get kind of mad about that, and the English and their queen, Queen Elizabeth, who is this lady up here in her awesome dress, decides, we're not just going to let you push us around and decide that you get all of that land just because the Pope says, because I don't care what the Pope says, because I'm Protestant. That's what Queen Elizabeth is. That's what England is at this time. And so they start challenging England's power at sea. The defeat of the Spanish Armada, you can start reading about that on page 37. Basically what you need to know is, what I had just been talking about. England challenges Spain at sea. She sends Sir Francis Drake on this huge, long 3-year journey, raiding all of these Spanish ports and stealing all of the Spain's resources and gold and all this kind of stuff. And Spain gets really angry about this, so they send the Spanish Armada, which is 130 ships, to the English Channel, and basically the Spanish are sending these huge galleons, which are giant ships, and they don't maneuver well in the small English Channel, and they especially don't maneuver well against the smaller English ships. So what ends up happening is that England wins, and it's important for 2 reasons, and these reasons are what you really need to know about why the Spanish Armada being defeated by England is important. It proves that England could defend itself, and that Spain could be beaten. And the reason that that is so important is that at this time Spain's kind of like the bully of the world, and they're the most powerful, and they have the power to control all of the exploration that's going on in their territory, and they're stopping other nations in Europe from doing any exploration. But now they get beaten by England, and other countries start thinking, oh, well, maybe Spain's not that big and bad, maybe we can go over there and do some exploring, and that's what they start doing. So now person that we're going to talk about right now is Samuel de Champlain. He can be found on page 38. He's this guy right here. He is going to be exploring the St. Lawrence River Valley as well, just like Jack Carter, and he is going to set up a trading post in Quebec. So you need to know that he sets up a trading post in Quebec. So yeah, Henry Hudson can be found on page 35. He's at the very beginning of this section. He lands off the coast of New York, and he is sailing under the Dutch flag. So places like the people like the Dutch and the French are sending their explorers, and they're going to set up places, trading posts, and these trading posts like New France and New Netherlands, they start getting successful, and the Spanish don't like it, but you know, one of the effects of the Spanish Armada being defeated is that it proved that Spain could be beaten, and they don't care if the Spanish don't like it. They are just going to go ahead and do what they want to do. Now, one thing that you have to remember is that just because Spain is beaten doesn't mean that they stop being a world power. They still control all of this territory in the Americas, okay? And basically why that's important is they have a lot of land, and they have to start thinking about how they're going to control that land and run it efficiently. So in Chapter 2, Section 3, we start talking about how Spain sets up its colonial government to run effectively. One of the ways is that they divide it into two provinces or two viceroyalties. So you need to know that they divide into two viceroyalties, New Spain and Peru. New Spain is up here in the red, and Peru is down here in the yellow. They also built roads, and they want to make sure that their colonies are efficient and that farms start to grow, because what you do with the colony is that you grow stuff, or you harvest things out of the land that you are ruling over in the new territory, and then sell it to people back in Europe. And if you want to sell a lot of things, you have to have big farms, and in order to have big farms, you have to have a lot of labor. And so the Spanish government starts setting up these encamidas. Encamidas and haciendas can be found on page 42. Haciendas are farms. So in order to have large haciendas, you have to have labor, and that's what an encamida is. It's forced Native American labor, and basically slaves, Native American slaves. The Spanish government would give these encamidas to the Spanish colonists to work on the farms, and basically the encamidas provide slave labor for these farms, and they grow larger, and the Spanish are able to sell more things, like sugar and stuff like that. When talking about encamidas, you talk about Bartolomé de las Casas, because he is going to be a Catholic, or he's going to be a Spanish priest who is part of a mission, and a mission is a settlement with a church. This is a picture of what a mission might look like. So you need to know something about missions. I would write that down. It's not on your study guide, but it can be found around page 43, because that's where Bartolomé de las Casas is. He is going to be fighting for Native American rights and getting the new laws passed and all this kind of stuff. But the main goal of a mission is to convert Native Americans to Christianity, because this is a settlement with a church and stuff like that. So page 43, look that up. Columbian Exchange can be found on page 44. We've talked a lot about the Columbian Exchange. It's one of your B-level questions. But the Columbian Exchange is basically the movement of plants and animals in between the two hemispheres. We all know that hemispheres, if you draw a line in the middle of the earth, you got the eastern hemisphere and the western hemisphere. So things that are over in the eastern hemisphere go to the western. Like before the Columbian Exchange, there were no cows in America, and before the Columbian Exchange, there were no potatoes in Europe. So with the Columbian Exchange, you get these movement of plants and animals between the two hemispheres, but not all of these things are positive. Not all of these things are animals and plants and things that people can use. A lot of things are going to be diseases, and that goes back to even with the fall of the Aztecs and the Incas. The Spanish bring over these diseases, and the Native Americans have no immunity to them. So one of the negative effects is that 20 million Native Americans die in the Americas, and 90 to 95% of Native Americans die in Central America, and that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of people. That's like if you have a room full of people, like in one day in class, and then the next day there's like 2 left. I mean, that's a whole bunch of people. So another negative side effect of or consequence, if you will, of the Columbian Exchange is the movement of African slaves to the American continents. This is going to be found in chapter 2, section 4, and that's going to be on page 50, is really what I want you to key in on. There are 4 main reasons why the Spanish start using African slaves on their sugar plantations instead of Native Americans. And like I said, it's on page 50. There's 4 bulleted points. The Native Americans were dying too quickly, so the Africans are immune to the diseases. They have no allies. It's cheap labor, permanent source of cheap labor. And the last one is that they had experience because they have been working on sugar plantations in Europe. That's why part of the reason why they're so immune to the diseases as well. Another thing that you might want to talk about is the Middle Passage. That's what you would talk about when you look at how these African slaves are getting over here. The Middle Passage is this part of this triangle right here. It's the journey, the very difficult, terrible, horrible journey between the Americas and Africa. So from Africa to the Americas, they would load up these Africans on these ships, and it was just a terrible, harsh journey. 15 to 20% on each ship died in the Middle Passage, so maybe something to remember. Now, that's all for the terms. Let's move right along to talk a little bit quickly about the B-level questions. With the B-level questions, if you have been paying attention and taking good notes and all of that, most of them you will see match up with things that we've already talked about. Number 1, we didn't talk quite as much about, but if you go to the first section of this unit, chapter 1, section 1, on page 6, you will find the information that you need to know. Advantages, having more people, more farms, all of that kind of stuff. More food. Disadvantages, disease can spread quickly. That's one of the ones that comes to mind. But you're going to need to think of the disadvantages because the book talks a lot about the advantages. So I'd go to page 6 for that. The environment affect the way native peoples lived. We talked about, I would talk about the Inuits, how they made their igloos out of ice because they live where there's only ice around. We talked about the 3 geographical zones in your notes. So this is chapter 1, section 2, chapter 1, section 3 for this question. You just need to talk about how or what you think would lead to, the environment having anything to do with how people live. So yeah, the rest of these we've talked a lot about. Key changes in Europe. Talk about the Black Death, Great Famine, 100 Years of War, Renaissance, Reformation, all of that stuff you need to include in that answer. We talked a lot about this defeat of the Spanish Armada. Why is it important? What happens after the Spanish Armada? How do other countries feel or look at Spain after they're beaten? What factors allow Europeans to defeat the Native Americans? We talked about 3 bulleted points that fit right in there. They made alliances, the spread of European diseases, and they treated them brutally. But why did that stuff do that? Why did that stuff lead to the defeat of the Native Americans? Is important. You need to explain why. The last one is explain the effects of the Columbian Exchange. Positive, negative effects. What is the Columbian Exchange? Explain that. What are some of the negative effects? Back it up with details. Negative effects of diseases, because diseases killed 20 million and 90 to 95%. You need to support yourself with details. All right, so go through your study guide again, read over it. That's how you'll find the answers to the B-level questions. So yeah, that's basically how each of these are going to work. These will be up on the website. They'll be on YouTube. You can rewatch it as many times as you need to until the test. It's a great resource to help you study. So good luck studying and good luck on the test.